I have a study here that was released January, this month. I can't say that for Saturday, but it's January 2014. It's entitled California's 58 Crime Rates, Realignment in Crime in 2012. And so I'm comparing a couple of tables. I'm looking at your table from the report that you published in December of last year on page 6. It's your table 1, violent property crimes before and after realignment by county. And I think we acknowledge that Los Angeles is a bit of an outlier, even from your conclusion, with regard to the impact of realignment on property crime, in that, well, both violent and property, but Los Angeles is, according to your table, violent crime rate was down 2.7% and property crime 1.8%. But the thing, and the other report that I have here, the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, has different figures, but one of the differences is that you were looking at January to September, and that was of 2012?
That's right.
Right. So you looked at a 9-month period.
That's right. We did not want to, since we had the luxury of using monthly data here, remember that 2011, the last 3 months, are a period when realignment was in place. So we focused on the closest time period available and wanted to make sure that our comparison includes the same months. So we restricted it to January through September of 2011 and 2012.
So this other report has a table which looks at change in crime rates 2012 versus 2010.
Right.
So I guess they're trying to capture the same effect of realignment that's in their title, but also this, but they're using a slightly different metric.
That's right.
And using that slightly different metric, they show LA's violent crime down 11% when using the 2010 to 12 as opposed to the January-September.
Okay.
Down 11% compared to your down 2.7%, which is a significant variance. And then the property crime that you saw go up 1.8%, using this other window, they had it just at 0, no change whatsoever. So just shifting the window of perspective brings us slightly or significant different results.
I agree with that. Let me point out that in our analysis, what we do is we recognize that there are these underlying trends that exist, and there are seasonalities as well. And also that these things might actually differ at the county level, not only at the state level. So we actually purged our data of the what was happening prior to realignment. So we took out changes that took place the year prior to our pre-period as well. So we've subtracted out those trends and those seasonalities as well. And that's what we use in our analysis, where we try to determine what the causal effect of incarceration has been on crime.
And if you could just comment briefly on Assistant Sheriff McDonald's comment that she believes it's a little too early to make any determination with regard to the causal relationship of crime rates and realignment overall, that she thinks we probably should be, as the department suggested as well.
I think that what we have produced here are credibly causal effects of realignment for the first year of realignment. I have a high degree of confidence, and that's what we're producing here. I think that it is fair to stress that it is for the first year of realignment. And one could imagine that as counties have more time to implement various strategies, identifying what works, that they will have better outcomes. But at the same time, it's also possible, and we also heard that counties feel strained by these new responsibilities, and the question is if they will have the resources and the capacity to implement these strategies effectively. So it's not clear that we would see something different in the following years. We would like to see that happen, of course, but it's not clear.
Okay. Fair enough. And I'm going to channel Mr. DeVore here for a moment. I know he would ask this question if he were present. The motor vehicle theft was a significant increase. And I remember when he was in the Assembly, he had concerns that there could be an unintended consequence to the Cash for Clunkers program, that it could actually incentivize auto theft. Do you have any comment about that? Given that we now see an uptick in auto theft.
Yeah, well, I think that we also heard, coming back and looking at Terry McDonald's testimony, remember what she said about the auto thieves.
Yes.
They keep coming back, and they do it over and over again. They can't stop that.
But they're not stealing clunkers.
They're not stealing. Yeah, I have we don't know what they steal. I have no idea what it is that they steal. But I think, that we've certainly heard that type of anecdotal evidence. But I also think that there's more, maybe more telling evidence if you go to CDCR's data. You see that the offense with the highest recidivism rate, auto thieves. And also, of course, with realignment, this is a category of offenders with this history that would capture auto thieves. So from that perspective, in hindsight, maybe it is not too surprising that that's where we actually find an effect.
Thank you, Mr. Lofstrom. Colleagues, this is the first time I've ever had to say this. I have an emergency in my office I have to attend to in a few minutes, so I'm going to pass the gavel to Senator Hancock, and I apologize to those who have waited patiently to speak at public comment. I always enjoy listening very carefully to the public when they join us at the end of a hearing. I want to thank Mr. Edwards and the LAO, Mr. Lofstrom, of course, to the PPIC, to Mr. Hoshino at the department, and of course our panel earlier. We will be continuing this conversation, certainly. I think it's been a great hearing, and we've learned a lot today. And so I'm passing the gavel. Sorry, I will miss the last portion of our hearing.
Thank you very much, and good luck dealing with your situation. It is the first time I've ever seen you do this. Senator Leno. So first let me ask if there are, I do have one question that I didn't feel was precisely answered. And then see if there are other members with questions, and then we'll go to public comment. My question is whether your research looked at county-by-county data so that not only can we tell whether the counties that traditionally have sent more people to state prison are now having more second strikers, or an uptick, if that's where the uptick in your statistics is coming from. But also if there's any looking at whether there's a difference between counties in terms of how they manage their realignment population. Because we got some pretty stunning statistics from Mr. DeVore about the importance of program, and I think heard from the assistant sheriff and also from the Vera Institute that it matters. But I think it would be fascinating research to find out if the counties that do not do risk assessments and very little programming, are those counties the same counties that traditionally sent more people to state prison, and are those the counties, are they experiencing more or less of the uptick? And I wondered if you had looked at that.
So at this point in time, we know very little about specifically what the counties are doing, how they're implementing realignment, what specific strategies they're using. And of course, then we know even less than about what the consequences of the various approaches are. There are serious efforts in place, including by PPIC, to gather the kind of information and data from the counties and merge it with state-level data that would allow us to answer some of these questions and at the very least shed light on that. We're starting to learn a little bit more about what the counties are doing, but I think that it's fair to say that we don't have a particularly good idea of what specific strategies are using, and hence it's impossible to say what works or not. With respect to the research that I presented here, we don't have any information about second strikers or so forth. These are aggregate crime data that we're looking at, so we can't say exactly who is driving the increase in property crime rates. What we do know, since we're focusing on the changes in the incarceration rate, what we do know from our previous research is that the offenders who are most likely to be affected by realignment and not be incarcerated as a result of this reform, the ones who are most affected are parole violators who are spending less time behind bars. But there are also the pretrial population. We see a decrease in that as a result of realignment.
Yeah, but if they're parole violators, a lot would also depend on whether a risk assessment was being used. I mean, we had one situation in one county where a parole violator murdered his grandmother. Turned out he'd been released from county jail 12 times in the last year because of overcrowding. No risk assessment was used at that time, although I understand the county is now using a risk assessment.
Right, and I think that highlights that need for that specific information, that we need to know what is being implemented, and that's a starting point for finding out what really works. And we are in the process of doing so at this particular point in time.
Thank you. Just as a comment, doesn't particularly affect PPIC, but for the department, for the LAO, for the finance department, the people who advise us during the budget, one thing I learned from this hearing is that I think we need a real research program, some kind of talking with members about what they need in order to make informed decisions about how to spend our limited resources, and then try to figure out what is the best way and the best organization, the best configuration, if you will, to get us that information. Thank you. I mean, we have so much more to study, obviously. I mean, it's a very important path that we're taking now, and we need to do it with as much good information as possible. Do other members? Yeah. Senator Mitchell?
Thank you, Senator. And I tend to agree with you because I was struck. I'm glad I stayed to the end to hear your presentation, because earlier in the hearing we've continued to hear consistently that crime rate is down.
Yeah.
So when Senator Berryhill made his statement about his district, I thought, And then when you began and I looked at the first table, I noticed the decrease. But then as you continue to talk, so there really has been an uptick. Is the kind of mixed message out in the public domain because more research hasn't been done in the last year or two? The data isn't in. We don't necessarily want to connect the dots to realignment. Why do you think that is?
I think it's difficult to say. I think that there are a few potential contributing factors to that. One is that it varies across the counties. So you have some counties where you see upticks, and then you have some where you see a decline. And that provides a mixed message that makes it difficult to conclude that. We see at the statewide, we see an average, but once you look at the counties, you see these differences.
And it makes it difficult for us on a statewide basis to make a blanket statement about the success or failure of a particular program, quite frankly.
That's right, and that's why we went about our analysis in the particular way that we did. I think that there's also a contributing factor is the delay in the data becoming available to the public as well. And, this is the 2012 data didn't become available to the public and including us until July of last year. So I think it takes a while before
Interesting point.
I think it's an important point, and I think that we would, if we could speed up the process of making these data available to the research community, we will be in a position to provide useful information more quickly.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just have one point on your, I appreciate your study, and it was very interesting. I read the study and all the other papers. One thing I was, when I read it, having been a city councilman in San Jose for 14 years and county supervisor, I kind of thought, well, you know, I'd like to know what the arrest rate and the crime solve rate. So when you look at the flow of where the criminal activity is going, you can get a better feel for, are they arresting as many people this year as last year? What kind of percentage of those crimes that are reported are actually solved? And I think that relates to a lot of things, including more people committing crime, but also less people catching criminals. So I think looking at some real numbers there would probably maybe even out my thought process a little bit on this kind of report. But I really appreciate the information. I think it shows that we have to continually do research and really dwell on research and be real evidence-based when we make decisions on programs like the realignment program. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you all. To be continued. I think this has been a very valuable overview. And so thank you, and I think we're ready for comments from the public. Since we were all supposed to be someplace at 3:45. So if people could just say what they have to say in 1 minute, please.
Great.
And we appreciate your spending your afternoon with us.
My name is Emily Harris, and I'm the statewide coordinator for Californians United for a Responsible Budget. Thanks for the hearing. It was really informative. I wanted to just speak to some of the questions that came up around how we reduce incarceration costs. And I think one of the pieces that we've seen post-realignment is that we haven't actually closed any prisons. I know Norco was planned for closure, but we're planning to continue to keep it open. And that's one of the main cost drivers that we would really like the Budget Committee to be looking at this year, because again, the governor is asking for $500 million in additional jail beds, $160 million annually to keep Norco open, to activate new beds at DeWitt Nelson at the Northern California Reentry Facility, and constructing new beds at prison hospitals, and also wants to use some of the money that is slated for the in the recidivism reduction fund. Some of that money is $8.3 million of it is slated for design of a new prison. And so I think that really, we're also looking for $315 million to send people out of state, and moving forward with $810 million for building new infill beds. So I think that what the trend in California has been is build, build, build. And I know there's been a lot of concern about early release. And I think that we need to be really looking at public opinion, that this isn't about early release. It's actually about long overdue release. We've been keeping people in our prisons for decades, and there are some sentencing and parole reform measures outlined in the governor's budget proposal, and we support those, and we believe that they could be applied more broadly. So for example, if we're going to be providing good time credits for second strikers, why have that be prospective? Why not have it retroactive? And then we can be reducing that population even more significantly and very quickly. And I know that we're hoping for this 2-year extension. I believe that we can be reducing overcrowding now, and we can do that and have money that we can be investing in the kind of programs people need when they're coming home from prison. And I think that if we don't start doing parole and sentencing reform, we're just going to continue to be spending all of our money on building more cells and filling the cages that we've been, wasting our corrections budget on, and therefore slashing a lot of our social safety net services. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the Chairwoman, members of the committee. I'm Helene Meshar, representing the California Association of Alcohol and Drug Program Executives. We are the statewide association of treatment providers, substance use disorder treatment providers throughout the state. We previously submitted a letter to the committee with 5 recommendations that we hope the committee will consider as the budget deliberations go through. The goal of these 5 recommendations would be to improve the substance use disorder treatment system in the state and to reduce recidivism. On the front end, our investment recommendation is to fully fund Proposition 36 of 2000 Proposition 36, which diverted people out of prison and into treatment. It provides the infrastructure for many of the things that both Mr. DeVore and the LA County Sheriff Assistant talked about. It provides for drug courts, which is improved supervision of individuals diverted out of the system, and the flash incarceration. So the structure is there, the infrastructure is there for that kind of improvement in the system. And we would hope that the committee would look at refunding Proposition 36 as one way to reduce recidivism. On the other side, for in-custody and post-incarceration services, we're recommending two things, one of which is to expand the current in-custody post-release program of the Department of Corrections, which is the Substance Abuse Services Coordinating Agencies, which is the agency in the department that helps place individuals as they leave prison into residential treatment programs as they leave prison. We know that the recidivism reduction is a direct result of the length of stay of people in treatment, and that this could be a wonderful tool to help reduce recidivism by extending residential treatment. And our third recommendation is a recommendation that goes to something that Senator Manning talked about, which is utilizing some of the ACA funds to work with this. And because of Senator Mitchell's bill when she was in the Assembly, 361, of creating health homes, we're recommending that there be a specialized health home created for criminal justice system and for parolees, where you, and it would not cost the state any additional funds because the funds are already there through the Affordable Care Act, and you could maximize the use of the Affordable Care Act through the waiver and establishing a specialized health home for parolees.
Thank you.
And then we would just reiterate the comments made earlier about the IMD exclusion that is crucial to residential treatment. Thank you.
I think Senator Mitchell had a quick comment.
Just a quick one.
Yes.
I scanned your white paper briefly as it was just handed out.
Yes.
And I don't know that, and we can have an offline conversation, that parolees wouldn't fit under 361. I don't know that we define the target population so narrowly that they wouldn't fit.
No, but they meet the requirements of a health home and having the multiple complex.
Right.
Right, and that I think you could there, as far as we understand, that you could specify targeted services for them. So I'm happy to.
Because my point is, I think that it could happen under 361,
Yes.
as opposed to creating a separate program
Yes.
targeting parolees. Okay.
Right.
No,
and
that was
might
our-
be
that was
something
our-
that we could work into the budget.
Yes,
So
yes.
offline conversations, it sounds good. That sounds good.
Yes,
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you, Senator Hancock and members. Jim Lindberg with the Friends Committee on Legislation in California. It's been a very informative hearing. A word about expanding capacity. We think that adding beds is analogous to building new freeways to solve our transportation problems. As soon as we open them, they're full and overloaded, and it just keeps us from considering the difficult choices that need to be made to get our prison budget under control so that we can invest more in important social services and safety net programs. We're very concerned about the direction that we're going right now. We're very supportive of realignment, but we were disconcerted to hear in the first two budget hearings, the Senate budget overview hearing, and the Assembly budget overview hearing to hear the Department of Finance suggests that we may need to spend even more than what was allocated in SB 105 to increase capacity if we don't get the 2-year extension. Going to realignment, given the new caseload, it was very disturbing to hear about community-based organizations, contracts being canceled with CDCR prior to realignment and not being renewed under realignment, and these programs having to close their doors or barely existing on a shoestring budget when realignment was supposed to be not only a way to satisfy the court order, but also to produce much better policy outcomes. And it seems to us, given the new caseload at the county, that these programs should be utilized and shouldn't go wanting. And as was pointed out, counties are getting funding. The question is for us, how are they using their funding? And through the AB 109 mechanism and the Community Corrections Partnership, I think it's pretty clear to us that most of the funding is going towards sheriffs and jails rather than programs being run through probation and community services organizations. So we think that if realignment is going to work, we really need to shift more resources at the local level to service providers and so forth. I don't know how we do that with the existing formula under AB 109, but probably the best thing that the legislature could do right now would be, in order to encourage more programming at the local level, would be to not provide additional money for jail construction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, Laura Mignani with the American Friends Service Committee. I just wanted to address a couple of points. One of them was the question that Senator Mitchell asked about a reclassification of people in security housing units. They have held 640 hearings, and they have authorized 60% of the people they're hearing to be moved to general population, which you'd have to wonder what those people had been doing there all this time, number one. But number two, we're very concerned that with the shift to a STG framework, security threat group framework, from their gang validation framework, that they're actually expanding the net in many ways and reaching farther down into the community. So the question we hope will be asked at the February 11th hearing, for instance, is, are you then filling those beds again with people that you're pulling in? Because the racial profiling continues. And in the security threat group framework, judging from our offices, which are around the country, that's a framework that's been working very badly in a lot of places for really a major kind of racial profiling. So that's a big concern. I do want to recommend to the committee that you restore the good time credits that were taken away in the budget process from people in security housing units a few years ago. These are just people who used to qualify for good time. It gives people an incentive, it gives people something to hope for, and it saves the state money. And there's no excuse for not putting that back in place, especially when we're trying so hard to reduce these numbers. And finally, I just want to say, when we're looking at crime upticks, and we're trying to connect the dots to realignment, let's not forget what kind of state we're in economically. I mean, I don't think we can look at those numbers outside of that. And particularly when we're talking about a population that is excluded from most employment possibilities and most housing possibilities. These people are really at risk when they're released. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon. Thank you very much for the important, I appreciate the focus of this committee on the corrections budget. I'm Pete Wywordy with the California Partnership. We're a statewide coalition of anti-poverty organizations, and we see what's happening around incarceration in the state as something that is happening to people in poverty in the state. We also see that this budget, it's not lost on us that this budget and this committee is who we've been in front of year after year, talking about the devastating impacts of budget cuts to health and human services programs, $15 billion over the last 5 years, which I don't need to remind this committee of, but recognizing that now we are entering a state where the very dollars that could go into, we now have an opportunity to reinvest in these programs, in health care, in affordable housing, in welfare programs, child care, on down the list. and instead we're seeing an investment in further incarceration. And as my colleagues have said so eloquently, there are so many other opportunities and so many other alternatives that we should really look at: good time credits, medical parole, split sentencing, on down the list. And I'd like to draw your attention, and I'll give this to the sheriff, to a letter that we've authored with about 16 other organizations, and the list is growing. Just today we've got 5 or 6 more that have joined. Essentially saying what we need is investment in reducing poverty in California, and specifically around all of the programs we mentioned, CalWorks, CalFresh, et cetera, as well as removing the barriers to access to those programs. We are bringing people home. We hope that more folks will come home, and they need access to public housing. They need access to CalFresh, to CalWorks, and so we know that those decisions will become before this committee, and we hope that we can have that vision of investment in dollars in the future and things we can be proud of in California, eliminating poverty, getting us out of the highest poverty rate of any state in the country, instead of going down the well-tread path of further investment in incarceration. So, thank you.
Thank you. And for those of us that didn't get your letter, why don't you make sure we get it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, the sergeants will give it to us.
Good afternoon. Moi, les Régine Neptune, on m'a sorti d'Haïti. Pour qui ça? Peut-être papa en a fait avec Duvalier. Papa m'a avec maman, ouais bâti Vio avec Petitio ici dans New York. My name is Regine Neptune. I came from Haiti. Why? My father was politically embroiled with Duvalier, the president, a dictator. Both my parents rebuilt their lives in the U.S. with their children and extended family. I would like to address the Budget Committee and members of the Committee on Business and Professions of Consumer Protections. I applaud the Governor Brown for his attempts to reform the California prison system and comply with the mandates of the federal judges by addressing some of the human rights and overcrowding conditions in California prison systems through parole and sentencing reform strategies that may release 400 inmates. However, that is far less necessary to reduce overcrowding. Charles Dickens visited the state penitentiary in 1842 and wrote of his experience. He said, "The system here is rigid, strict, and hopeless solitary confinement. I believe in its effects to be cruel and wrong. I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than torture of the body, and because its ghastly signs and tokens are not so palpable to the eye and sense of touch as scars upon the flesh, because its wounds are not upon the surface, and it extorts few cries that human ears can hear, therefore I more denounce it as a secret punishment." Unfortunately, we only see Dickens' statement reflected in the solitary confinement of prisons, but also the entire institution and parole structure of the 21st century. It is that confinement that occurs with verbal, physical, cyberbullying, harassment, bullying, blackmail for those of us of color with prior offenses, experiences when some members of authority use and abuse their power at a win-at-all-cost policy, often for political gain and ethical, by disregarding ethical and moral consideration and the collateral damage to children, families, resulting in isolation from communities and family members on the omission of fact, as in exculpatory evidence, denying good time credits, denying witnesses, denying adequate representation, and inducing a financial or economic strangling as such. Too often, the process of rehabilitation becomes a destructive one that is used to humiliate pit families together, friends, employees, and employers against the parolees. Barriers to success are intentionally placed that prevent the individuals from breaking out of bondage. We wonder why gangs flourish and why crime rates increase, why the cycle of poverty and crime intertwine. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a whistleblower in my former career. For exercising my citizenship privileges, I have been punished and continue to be punished. Unfortunately, I will continue to be a whistleblower and exercise my citizenship rights. I stand before you to implore upon you that building more jails at a cost of $600 million to $9.8 billion to house people of color, the marginalized, and immigrants is not responsible direction for leadership to take while millions of cuts take place in safety net provisions. Prison conditions continue to deteriorate. We know that a reduction in recidivism will not succeed if you continue in the current path of revolving door policy. We need affordable housing, not jails. We need affordable schools of higher learning, not jails. We need to restore the existing prison conditions to a humane living environment that is not segregated and that fosters learning, job training, critical thinking strategies. Yes, I did say critical thinking among the inmates through education, job training, healthcare access within the prisons.
If you could, conclude,
Sure.
wind up.
Spending $500 or more for jail construction is unfortunately not smart investment in 21st century America. Correct me if I may, the cost of building one jail system in San Mateo County can provide not part or all of the SNAP program of the California state system. I implore you to restore, rebuild, and reinvest in the people, your constituents of color and poor, as stated in the Governor's State of the Union address, not jails and human cages that are environmentally hazardous and are placed out of sight and out of mind. I implore you to release us from bondage and the downward mobility cycle of years of failed correction policies and rehabilitation policies. During these negotiations, we seem to have made small gains. Agreements have been made and agreements have been broken. Optimistic legislative plans to improve conditions and reduce recidivism have been vetoed in the same manner that treaties had been broken and denied to the Native Americans and slaves, rendering him helpless and forever held in bondage, creating suboptimal conditions that lead to suboptimal results.
Thank you.
I've heard much of positive, and so again, I ask that you invest in restoring, rebuilding the safety nets that have been lost here in California.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Hello. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Tynan Krakoff, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, and I'm also a member of the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition, so I very much appreciate the SHU hearings. So SB 1022 brought $500 million in jail construction funding, and many counties applied for it. And Governor Brown's new controversial budget plan asked for another $500 million for jail construction. And this de-incentivizes reducing the jail and prison population. From the county's perspective, they see this as a chance for free state money, and of course most counties would apply. But where's the $500 million for affordable housing? Where's the $500 million for health and mental health care, education, jobs, etc.? We need to invest in social services. Far-fetched plans such as realignment aren't solving overcrowding because it doesn't address why there's overcrowding. The key word in prison overcrowding is overcrowding, not simply that it's prison. If your kitchen's crowded with people and you move everyone to the living room, you haven't solved the problem. You're just playing kick the can. We need to stop locking so many people up, and we need to build strong communities, not jails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. I will keep my comments very short, but I certainly concur with the comments of a lot of the prior witnesses, especially the document that was going around. I'm Ignacio Hernandez, and I'm here on behalf of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, which is a statewide organization of criminal defense attorneys. Let me just point out that as we go forward in these budget discussions, let's not be afraid to make some difficult decisions and look at the inflow of individuals into our county jails and the state prisons in particular to identify where in the law there are certain tweaks that we can make to ensure that there's fair prosecutions and that we get the right folks that are getting misdemeanors versus felonies. This past year, we did correct a drug transportation statute where we had folks getting a felony that was equivalent to drug trafficking, even though they were simply in possession for personal use. So we did fix that in a bill last year. It was signed by the governor. We now have identified 3 other statutes where there's a similar contradiction. So you're in possession for personal use, but if you're walking down the street, you get charged as if you're a drug dealer. And so we have opportunities to fix those statutes. And it's very similar to what we did with grand theft, petty theft threshold a few years ago, which in the governor's January proposal, he actually referenced in saving some costs to both county jail and state prisons because we adjusted it up for inflation after about 2 decades. But we've also found a few other statutes that need to have the monetary threshold increase. For example, if I am convicted of theft of an iPad, if it's below $950, I'm charged as a misdemeanor, petty theft. If I give it to somebody and it's stolen property, they can be charged with a felony for receiving stolen property. There seems to be something wrong with that, since I'm the one that stole it and I can only get a misdemeanor. So those are small tweaks that we can start making so that we focus our resources on the right individuals, and we ensure that prosecutions are focused on getting the right crime to the right offense. And certainly services are incredibly important, as you heard today, but we also need to look on the front end of who's going in. So we do have a list of some of the tweaks that we can make in statute. We would provide them to a sentencing commission, which we don't have yet. So we'll circulate those, and maybe we can have further discussion on how we can make some of those fixes. And I want to thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Hernandez, I have learned a tremendous amount from this hearing. I'm very grateful to all the people who came to testify, to the members that hung in. Everybody hung in very well. You too get medals. Yeah, Senator Mitchell and Senator Bell. And we will continue. This is just the beginning of the conversation. We will continue working on these issues as we move forward in the coming years, but certainly in the next few months as we look at the state budget and what our next steps can be. Thanks so much.